Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and gittens, brothers and sisters, dear friends, welcome back to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a world-renowned, world-famous, world-celebrated, award-winning, well, almost award-winning, comic book writer. You get to ask me about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. And let's get to it. Ryan Wilson, during your time at DC and writing Batman and Robin, how far in advance did you all plan? For example, when you did know you were, wait a minute, when did you know you were going to do No Man's Land? Was it just 1 year at a time or more? Also, how much influence did the editors like Denny O'Neil have on the Bat titles? Who would come up with the Batman events that would affect all of the Bat family books? What am I doing there? Well, you know, Nightfall, for example, that was Denny. Denny basically mapped that whole thing out. Well, he didn't map it out. He gave us the high points, and then at a Bat Summit for over 3 days, Denny, his associate editors at the time, Doug Mensch and Alan Grant, and I, we worked out, you know, how it was going to break down issue by issue, how the story was going to break down. But then he provided all of the dramatic high points in the story. You know, the arrival of Bane, the breaking of Batman's back, the replacement of Batman with another character, you know, all that. If you've read Nightfall, you know what I mean. There's a lot of dramatic high points. It really is an epic story, and Denny came up with that. And consequently, we had many Bat Summits over the years in which we would plan out the next year, or in some cases even the next 2 years continuity. And for these, we needed, you know, what Denny called a stunt or a gimmick. So Denny kind of retired from coming up with these ideas after Nightfall, and that's okay. He walked off the field a warrior because Nightfall was hugely successful. And the associate editors largely would come up with what happened next. And they came up with Contagion and Cataclysm, and ultimately Jordan Gorfinkel was running No Man's Land. That was his concept. Boy, he told me he came up with that concept with someone else, and I can't remember who it was, and they sort of worked that one out. So yeah, things were planned pretty far in advance. Nightfall in particular, if you look back, Nightfall kind of begins before we let you know Nightfall was beginning. We were setting things up prior to the official start of that event, and you can see that. I mean, it's the most carefully planned multi-title event I've ever worked on. It was very tightly controlled. You know, we got to meet and talk with each other a lot. It was very highly coordinated, and I think you can see it in the results. The following ones, maybe not so much. Now, the only one that I played a big part in coming up with was we knew we wanted a Batman, Bruce Wayne Batman, Bane rematch. I mean, that we had to have that, and that's what became Legacy. And I played a bigger part in setting that up. I mean, we arrived at the summit with the idea in mind that we wanted to do it, but not really a plan on how to do it. And it was me that introduced the idea that Bane would become associated with Ra's al Ghul, and the whole Wheel of Plagues idea. In fact, I remember, it's kind of embarrassing. I remember standing up. I got really passionate about the Wheel of Plagues, and I was up. I was describing what it would look like, the purpose of it, and everything else. And you know, everybody was looking at me like, you know, deer in the headlights. So I think I lost them a couple of times. I ended up having to do a drawing of what the Wheel of Plagues would look like. And but yeah, I mean, you know, Graham was at that summit as well, and he and I kind of drove it because it was a Bane-centric storyline, and we were the Bane guys, and we kind of drove that one toward Batman 700, which I think someone asks about later on. Oh, so there you go. Yeah, at DC, we plan things ahead of time. Marvel crossovers kind of slapped together at the last minute. Wrapped around some sort of high concept idea like Acts of Vengeance or whatever. And very much less organized, no summit, no interaction, no really talking back and forth. Just sort of, thrown into a blender. Okay, I gotta move that thing. Jason Shepard. I started really getting into comics in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I remember thinking at some point of my know-it-all youth how tired I was of seeing yet another Superman story drawn by Curt Swan or another Jim Aparo Batman adventure. It took me years to appreciate the incredibly consistent quality and craftsmanship of these and other professionals. How about you? Anyone whose work you didn't think was so great at the time, but you think the world of them? Jack Kirby, I mean, when I was a kid, Jack Kirby was everywhere. It wasn't that I didn't think much of his work, I just didn't think about it at all. Because when I was a kid, Kirby was everywhere at Marvel. I voraciously devoured all of the big monster books. And I love the Kirby stories, and I love the Ditko stories. And this is really where I became aware of Steve Ditko. And I was a big fan of Ditko's because his work was kind of odd and esoteric. And I was just drawn to it as a kid. But Kirby, he's expertly drawing these, aliens and big monsters and destruction and all these exotic locales and everything else. But, when you're a kid, and, if you're, whatever you're getting, you're satisfied with it. If you're happy with it, you're happy with it. You really don't think about, you don't say, hey, great mashed potatoes, Mom. It's just the mashed potatoes. And to me, Jack Kirby was mashed potatoes. Because he was always there. And you kind of got to blame Jack because he was so freaking prolific. And even though I was an enormous fan of Fantastic Four, I loved Fantastic Four when I was a kid, still love it today, I never really thought about Kirby because Kirby's just there. He's just, it's to be expected. It's another Jack Kirby comic. And so I took Jack for granted is what I did. And I really didn't take notice of him until he left Marvel. And when he left Marvel, it was pretty apparent what Jack Kirby brought to those titles, because they weren't anywhere near as good after he left than when he was on them. And so I sort of started paying attention. Of course, I've eagerly followed his every effort at DC Comics, and I became this huge Kirby aficionado. And of course, Kirby did a whole PR press, and he was going to conventions and everything else, so you actually would get to meet and talk to the guy. And, that helped a lot. But yeah, I'm a huge Kirby aficionado, and I wasn't when I was a kid. And I think you can see why, because he was just a consistent thing. He was always there. He wasn't like Steve Ditko. He'd be there and he'd be gone. Or Wally Wood, he'd be here, he'd be there. And you had to kind of pay attention to follow them. It's just Kirby. You went to the newsstand, there was a Kirby comic. If it was Thor or Ant-Man or Fantastic Four or whatever it was always going to be there. So, he was just so darn prolific. Maybe that's my problem. That's why I'm not appreciated and loved enough, except by you people. Okay, Joshua Ignatowski. Besides issue 700, which I mentioned previously, what would you say is your favorite issue of Detective Comics that you've worked on, and why? I got to do this, almost everything I did with Graham was a blast, because, we're friends, and he's so damn good, and he's such a Batman scholar, and it was such a pleasure to work with him. We really were peas in a pod on this run. One of my favorites, it's a time travel story. It's a 2-part arc in Detective Comics, and it has the Martian Manhunter, has John Jones, both as a police officer and as Martian Manhunter in the story, and it's very much an X-Files kind of story, to the point where we actually have Mulder and Scully in a little cameo on one page, and it's about a character who travels backwards in time, committing crimes as he goes, and Batman and Martian Manhunter work together to figure out what the hell's going on. How can this guy be here, there, and everywhere, but we can't find him? And they quickly determine that he is traveling backwards in time. And the coolest thing about this story was not only it was fun to write, it was Graham on art and Eduardo Barreto on inks, which to me is just comic book heaven. And they were just they just killed it on this arc. Well, they always bring it. You know, Graham never phones it in. He got too much pride. And Eduardo on Graham, it's just a beautiful marriage of pencils and inks. But the other cool thing is that I got to revisit this arc when Dan Jurgens asked me to write 2 episodes of Booster Gold. Booster Gold, of course, involves time travel, and I thought, well, let me go back to that detective arc and explore that a little further. And that was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun on that one. Another one that I remember is the Riddler arc. I think it's a 4-issue Riddler arc that Graham and I did, and it was tough to write. I've spoken about this before. Riddler's my favorite Batman villain, but boy is he hard to write because, you know, of the template, of the way the story has to be set up, the riddles and everything else. And it took me almost 2 years to put together this baseball-themed Riddler story. I mean, I knew I wanted the Riddler, and, you know, Batman running all over Gotham like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to solve the riddles. I knew he wanted to do that. I wanted to do that, but that's a tall order. You know, how do you make that work? I also knew I wanted the ultimate confrontation between the Riddler and the Clue Master. A character, when I was a kid, Clue Master was introduced, and I'm like, what? Why do we need this guy? We got the Riddler. He's nowhere near as cool as the Riddler. And when I wrote on the Batman titles, I pretty much put that forward, that the Clue Master was a complete loser and also ran as a villain. And I really wanted the Riddler to get his revenge against Arthur Brown, the Clue Master. Another one involving the Riddler, and this was art by Kieran Dwyer, was Detective Comics Annual, and it was basically a Riddler Year One. They shouldn't even have paid me to write the story. I had so much fun writing it. And of course, the Detective Comics 7 Pirate Batman, another big highlight for me that I've discussed many times here on the old program. And of course, Detective 700, which was Graham and I, you know, doing one of these anniversary titles. Yeah, it's a favorite. It paid out pretty good. Didn't pay out anywhere near what Batman 500 did, though. Boy, that was a huge payday for Doug and Jim Aparo, and good for them. This was a fun story because Graham and I wanted to do a trap, because we like Batman traps, and of course, just like writing the Riddler, traps aren't that easy to write either. You know, come up with a convincing trap and a resolution. You know, you just don't want your character chained up in a burning building and then 2 panels later he's escaped and you don't show how. So we didn't want to just set up a suspense scenario that didn't have a satisfying or interesting conclusion, and that Batman didn't use all of his wiles and wits to escape the trap. Not that the trapper made any kind of error that Batman exploited, but Batman had to figure out the science, the engineering, whatever. His mind had to work quickly to solve this trap. And I'll confess here that Graham came up with the trap because he had heard a version of this trap, basically trapped in a sealed well with the water rising all about. He had heard it on a Lone Ranger radio show, and he told me, what the setup was and the resolution, and I said, well, that's a good setup. That's a great trap, claustrophobia and drowning. But I looked into the science of it all, and I felt like I can come up with a better conclusion than the radio writers did. And we were both real happy with it. Graham and I are giggling like schoolgirls, because we came up with a really cool trap for Batman. And if you read our run, you'll see that there's several times we put Batman in almost impossible positions to escape from. And of course, he's Batman, so he got out of it. But we were always proud of ourselves when we came up with a convincing, realistic trap that would work, and all the rest of it, and all the suspense elements involved. But generally, just working with Graham, just getting to do Detective Comics, for goodness sake. When I was offered Detective Comics, it's like, would you want to write Detective Comics? And I'm like, the oldest continually running American comic book in history? Yes, I want to be a part of that. I want my name on a few of these. And my name's on almost 85 of them. So I'm a happy camper. I can look back on this with great fondness. And it was a great time to be working there. Of course, working with Graham, but everybody else that worked on the title, Mike Nasser and Stas Johnson and many other guys I got to work with on detective comics. Brian Stelfreeze did an awesome issue. So it was a good time. It was a good time. Hey, the site now has 10% more Natowski. I don't know if you know that. And here he's back with, while we all love the iconic versions of Batman and Superman, who we know today, would you ever consider writing stories about their more aggressive Golden Age versions, so long as it was made clear these were Elseworld stories which fell outside the canon? No, I really wouldn't want to write anything like that that's too close to the actual continuity. I mean, writing Pirate Batman or Vampire Batman or Batman set in the 1900s. Yeah, okay, that's cool. But Batman set in basically his own past, it's too likely they would make that part of canon, and I don't like that. I mean, I don't like the fact that Killing Joke and Dark Knight Returns are considered canon now. These things, unlike the Elseworld titles, which are just imaginary tales or just what ifs, they're one-off fun stories. When you do stories that are too close to the continuity, you're diluting the continuity, you're diluting the character, and you're leaving it open. And even the what if stories can be dangerous, because someone pointed out to me recently that if you look at the most recent entries in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're all what if stories. I mean, actual what if comics turned into movies. So I don't want to go there. I mean, it might be fun to write, but I wouldn't want to go there. Superman throwing landlords out of apartment windows. Yeah, that might be fun to write, but I don't want to go there. Josh is back with, how did you first meet Michael Hutchison? Michael Hutchison, my proofreader, my nitpicker in chief. This is the guy when I write. Well, I'll go on to that a little bit more. I'll talk about how I met Mike. I met Mike on the old Dixonverse message boards, but I actually got to meet him in person at one of the Dixonverse dinners. I forget how many of these we had. They were held in Chicago, and they were largely just anybody could come. I mean, there was no invitation list. Although we did tell Rick Johnson he couldn't come to it. I did not want a quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, quote unquote comic book journalist listening in at Dixonverse. It was free and easy, wild and woolly conversations. And largely these were people who had come together and formed basically like a fan family around my old message board. And these were people that would post, consistently on the board. And a lot of these people became friends at that board, remain lifelong friends to this day. And I'm kind of proud of that. And I don't look upon any of these people as fans. I do look upon them as friends. And Hutchison was just a fun guy. Here we have, in the row here, we got Scott Beatty there, Scott McCullough. Scott McCullough ran the message board for a long time. Gordon Purcell sitting next to me, and that's Hutch in the background. But these were fun. It was always in Chicago, and they were held. This one, I don't know what place this was. They were always cheap, pizza places or Tex-Mex places and stuff like that. And I think one year I picked up the check. I'd had a pretty good year that year, and I picked up the check. I didn't always pick up the check. I'm a cheap bastard. So I think I left a tip every year, though. I think I did that much. But yeah, so I met Mike, and I knew Mike was Mike was a nitpicker. Mike was like, if you made a mistake anywhere, he would go, oh, you made an error here in continuity or a typo or whatever, and I'm like, wow, this is the guy I want looking over my stuff. And so when I first started self-publishing, I had a woman who would edit and format the books for me for ebook and for paperback publication. But I wanted one more level on the apple sorter. And I thought, man, Hutch would be the guy. He would find typos like a hog looking for truffles. And so many of my books were read by Hutch first. I would write them, do the rewrites, do a write through, and then send them off to Hutch, and he would be the first person to read them. So I got to read all of these books for free, and you know, I rewarded him in various ways. He wasn't on the staff. I didn't give him a paycheck, anything like that. He was strictly volunteer, but you know, does an awesome job, and I trust him because he would just find stuff I missed. You know, when you're a writer, no matter how many times you rewrite the damn thing, you miss typos. And as I mentioned in a previous video, there are common typos I make all the time, constantly, the same word spelt wrong over and over and over again, just because that's where my fingers went, which is unusual because I'm not a typist. Maybe if I was a typist, I wouldn't make these typos. Maybe if I could type, I would make more typos. We don't know, but Hutch keeps me from that. So yeah, I met him on the Dixon verse boards first, and then actually got to meet him in person numerous times over the years at Dixonverse dinners and conventions and things like that. But he's an awesome dude, is what he is, and very dedicated and very what is the word I am looking for? I cannot think of it. Anyway, but he's a good guy. Josh is back with, you've talked about how in a fair while DC's been trying to get people on the internet talking about what was happening in their comics, but hasn't been successful at translating that into sales. On the other hand, given Eric July's record-breaking multi-million-dollar sales figures, I'd say he has quite effectively succeeded at this endeavor where DC has failed time and again. From what you've been able to observe of the Rippaverse from the inside as part of the crew, what do you think Eric did right that DC missed landing on? Well, you have to remember that Eric had a big following from his work in the music business. So he had a big following. So he had a fan base. He had an Eric July fan base. And he presented the idea of them buying comics that he would create. And enough of them liked him as a creator and wanted to follow him as a creator that they followed him into comics. I mean, now maybe some of his followers were comic fans before, but I'm going to say the majority of his fans were not comic book fans or even comic book readers. But Eric introduces them, you know, look, this is a medium that I love, and they trusted him and followed him into this new place. So he starts out with this really solid fan base. Also, the guy knows how to work the internet, and there's a connection that he forms, you know, through his videos. I mean, tirelessly makes videos. You can't escape him, which is that's how you market, friends. And he's good at marketing, and you know, keeps his promises to his customers. They get the product that they wanted when he said they're going to get it, and he keeps his promise. He keeps his promises to his creators. But largely his continuing success comes from a very important element that I bring up a lot here, which is earnestness. He likes his readers. He likes his characters. He likes his creators. He wants to bring you more. He's into it. He's into the game. He likes what he's doing. He's like Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill will take on a project for less pay because he likes the project. Okay? So there's an earnestness there that comes across. And that's Eric, and that's the rest of us. The Saskas are into this, all in. Mike Baron is all in. I'm all in. You know, we love comics. We like writing comics. We like being offered the opportunity to write comics, and you know, be largely left alone in someone else's, you know, sandbox. And that's, you know, that's the secret, earnestness. I've discussed this before, but we back at CrossGen, our readers decided, and as a publisher, you have to pay attention to what your readers want. It's not what you want or what you think they want to read, which is too often the case in comics today. You know, we think you'll like this comic, or we think you should like this comic. No, we think you have to like this comic. And if you don't like this comic, you're the scum of the earth. that marketing don't work. I mean, you wonder why DC and Marvel, it doesn't click for them. Half the time they're telling you how wonderful the product is. The other half of the time, they're telling you that you are awful for not liking what they're putting out. So when I was at CrossGen, our readers very much voted that, not voted, they voted with their wallets that we were a genre publisher. When we would introduce a new title in a different genre, they would buy it, for a while. And it would be our best-selling title at the time. I worked on El Cazador, a pirate book, straight up pirate book. No witches, no zombies, no supernatural elements, no superheroes, no magic. Just straight up pirate historical adventure, and it was our best-selling title by far. I mean, it was outselling Sojourn, which was our biggest title up to that point. And unwisely, the Marcoletti decided that we weren't a genre publisher, that it was all about the uber sigil story, the overarching story that sat upon our continuity like an 800-pound gorilla. And and I tried to point out to him, El Cazador, it isn't part of the Sigilverse. It isn't part of that story, and it's our best-selling title. The readers are telling you they want us to just become a genre publisher. Why? Because they trusted us, because we were earnest. If we were doing a detective story, it was a detective story. There was no BS. We worked hard to make it the best detective story we could. Espionage, sci-fi action, horror, whatever it was, we were working to make it the best. It wasn't a pastiche. We weren't winking at the audience. We weren't anything else. We were into it. We were all in. We were going to bring you the best story in that genre we could, and readers learned to trust us. And we betrayed that trust by continually looking through the wrong end of the telescope and concentrating on that uber story, which the readers had early on told us they had no interest in. That they just wanted to see the characters they'd fallen in love with in stories that would, thrill and amaze them. So Rippaverse is that. It is us listening to what you want. We're just trying stuff out. We try out the Horseman, hugely successful. There's no way to know that. And what I should say also is, when Eric first brought me on, he said, "Well, we're going to sell big because of your name." I said, "Well, number one, I don't know how big a name my sales point, how big my name, my sales point, how big a sales point my name is, alone, because I'm an invisible handwriter. I explained all that. You know that from listening to the show." I said, the other thing is, I said, comic readers will know my name, but your fans won't. You're going to have to introduce me to your fans. You're going to have to give me your imprimatur so that they trust me to write your characters. And I said, you have to take that approach, because they won't automatically know who I am. I'm comic book famous, which is barely famous at all. Outside his tiny little circle, I'm an unknown. So he did that. That's the way he marked, because he's a smart guy. And he marketed it that way. This is Chuck Dixon, explained who I was, my background, largely the characters I worked on. And Alpha Core 1 did very well. And then I wanted to do the Horseman. Joe Bennett and I came up with the Horseman, more in the Punisher, Batman vein. And, you never know how these things are going to go, but it's been highly, highly successful. And it's been a very good campaign. And I think once readers get the book in their hands, they're going to be even bigger fans of it. And I think the next one's going to sell even more. Now we're doing, next up we have Zaylan, which is a cosmic character. And traditionally cosmic characters don't do that well in the comic book format. But the Rippaverse people have done a lot of study into the demographics of who buys Rippaverse comics. And they told me they're very confident that Zaylan will do very, very well for them, because of the nature of I won't give away what they told me about the demographics of their readership, but it was encouraging. That Joe and I just did Zaylan because we thought, hey, he's cool, maybe a one-off thing to introduce him to the Rippaverse, but we might never get to do another one because cosmic characters, like I said, traditionally don't sell. But Eric and his crew have determined that they think Zaylan's going to do all right, which is why they're pushing it forward on the schedule. to get it out there to you folks quicker. So that's really the difference, is earnestness. I mean, when's the last time you read anything, internet posting or hype from DC or Marvel that you believed it? That you thought, hey, they're going to deliver just what they said. They don't even promise that much. They just tell you that, hey, here's something and you have to like it. And, you know, it's kind of like those ads McDonald's does about how everybody loves McDonald's. Well, if everybody loves McDonald's, why do you have to do ads telling us about it? Isn't that something that we should just intuit? So it's, yeah, marketing is a funny thing, and you got to be smart and you got to be nimble. And Eric and his crew are all those things. Joshua's back with, how did you first learn about being an invisible hand style of author, and what got you to ultimately decide to be one yourself? I think largely lack of ego. I wanted my work to speak for itself. I really didn't want to put myself out there. You know, I wanted people to enjoy the stories I was writing. And I wanted enough people to enjoy them that I could keep writing them. So, but the invisible hand thing, the actual concept of the invisible hand writer, came to me over time before I ever heard the term. I think my first introduction to invisible handwriting was Archie Goodwin. Now, growing up, it was Stan Lee, and Stan was very much, hey, I'm Stan Lee, I'm writing this comic. Stan let you know he was writing a comic, he would interject editorial comments. Sometimes the comics read as almost a conversation from Stan to you. Even the marketing blurbs on the cover were like Stan talking to you directly, you know, hyping you up. Archie wrote in more of a way where he let the artist tell the story. The artist was king because it's a visual medium. There's no getting away from that. I'm not going to denigrate my role as a writer in comics. Comics need writers, but the artist is the stars of the show because the visuals are the stars of the show. And Archie certainly understood that, and he became an artist's writer because he would allow them to exhibit their storytelling chops. And he wrote very tight, full script, but there was flexibility there. And he understood because he drew comics himself. Not a whole lot of them, but he drew a few comics himself. So he understood what was involved sitting at that drawing table. And he understood panel composition and all the rest, and he understood the cinematic qualities of comic book storytelling, and he would just sort of write just enough dialogue, just enough captions so the reader could follow along to tell the story, but never get in the way of the art. Let the art, as much as possible, show, don't tell. Let the artist tell the story. And that's really my first introduction. I was very attracted to this. Now, I didn't understand why I was attracted to these stories, why I love these stories so much, why I would read them and reread them and reread them over the time. There was never a time when I was a kid I didn't have my Archie Goodwin comics separate from the rest so I could, look at them over and over and over again, study them. And then sometime, in high school, I ran across Albert Camus. I read The Stranger. And that book blew my mind because it's a very simple story about a guy who murders another guy in Algeria and goes on the run from the police. And it's a very simple story, but the way it was told, and it wasn't told like a crime thriller, and there was no hyperbole in it. There was no melodrama. It was just simple declarative sentences. His writing was so spare, so terse, and yet created emotions in you and created suspense and all the rest of it. And I'm like, wow, this is awesome. This is incredible. And it really opened my mind to more simple writing techniques. And what Camus he was an invisible hand writer. He wasn't inserting himself. He wasn't showing how clever he was with how, he wasn't trying to show how arch he was with word usage or phrasing or anything else. He was just telling you a story. Boom, ba boom. This happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, and all the way to the end. And I was just fascinated with that idea. But still, again, not realizing why. Just that it was terse. I liked that. And I didn't understand that there was a nuance even to terseness. There was a nuance to writing in that way. And I wouldn't come to it. I was a high school kid, a dopey high school kid. What did I know? It wasn't really until I read a book about Howard Hawks, the film director. And this guy directed every genre you can imagine, from science fiction to screwball comedy to westerns to film noir. This guy did it all. And he talked about, in the book, they had, extensive sets of interviews with him, and that they quoted from. And in it, they talked about how after making the movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Hawks left Hollywood. He left the United States, and for 5 years lived in France and other countries in Europe, and just basically had a high old time. And then decided he wanted to return to the United States and make another movie. And so he comes home, and what happened in those interim 5 years is the explosion of television. And he looks at television with something like horror, and he's like, my gosh, it's every night there's story. Americans are sitting watching hours of story. There's story during the day, there's story at night. You turn on TV and there's stories, and a lot of them are Western stories at the time. And he's like, well, how do you make a movie now? How do you convince people to get out of their easy chair and go down to the movie theater and buy a ticket and actually go see a movie? I mean, when they're already seen a story, they can stay home and see stories. What are you going to do to bring them into the theater and keep them there? And so his idea was to basically eschew story. Just don't worry about the story. Go beyond story. So he makes the movie Rio Bravo. Sorry, Graham. He makes the movie Rio Bravo, John Wayne vehicle, Western, standard stuff, nothing groundbreaking, nothing huge about it. But his approach to making the movie is what makes Rio Bravo a classic, and what makes it a beautiful piece of invisible hand writing as well as invisible hand directing. There's a story, but it's bare bones, simple. It's not that different than maybe an episode of The Rifleman. But what separates it is that Hawks just doesn't concern himself with the plot points. He doesn't concern himself. The plot advances. It kind of advances on its own. It's just the thing about Rio Bravo is the movie just seems like it's happening. It's just happening. Nobody planned it. Nobody wrote it. Nobody designed this. Nobody paced it out. Nobody thought about where the second and third act begin and end. The movie just kind of happens, and we follow these characters, and we're introduced to these characters, and a lot of the movie is character driven. But that's not to say they ignore plot, because the plot's there. It's there, but it's mentioned in passing. It's never mentioned it's never directly spoken to, except enough to clarify it for the viewers and the moviegoers. And I mean, there's things like I can't even count how many times I've seen this movie, and it wasn't until maybe like the 16th time I saw it that I realized that the stagecoach that everybody talks about in this movie, there's always a mention of the stagecoach. It's going to come here and it's going to leave in the morning, is never seen. Because Hawks is like, there's no reason to have that stagecoach scene. We've all seen the stagecoach rolling into town, and the shotgun guy jumping down, and the strong boxes being taken off, all that crap. He's like, people see that every night. We don't need to see that. Let's just ignore that and show more of John Wayne, flirting around with Angie Dickinson. I mean, and so the movie just sort of seems to happen. And when he said that, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I've been trying to do. Just stay in the background and let the story tell itself. Let the artist tell the story. And those are largely my favorite writers. Now, there's exceptions. If you're really, really talented, there's exceptions to invisible handwriting in my mind. Ed McBain, Even Hunter, or whatever his real name was, a Polish name a mile long, very prolific. Screenwriter, novelist, and everything else. He wrote a series of 87th Precinct novels, and he wrote them in a voice that was so conversational that he felt it was okay to sometimes refer to the reader by name, which always cracked me up. Because, I mean, you don't know the name of the person reading this little paperback. But he would say, and that's the way it is, Dolores. And it always cracked me up. But it enforced the fact that he has this conversation. He's inserting himself in the story, conversational style. It's him sitting down and Ed McMahon is very much present when you're reading it, and I will give him a pass. He's such an amazing writer, and it wasn't ego or anything else. This was just the tone he used for these novels was him telling you a story. Another guy I'll give a pass to is Kurt Vonnegut. If you've read Slaughterhouse-Five, you know that Kurt Vonnegut literally inserts himself in the story, but it's in such a way that it was just chilling, because a lot of the events in Slaughterhouse-Five are not the crazier ones that take place on other planets, but a lot of the events are ones that Vonnegut himself experienced as a prisoner of war during World War II. And there's this terrific passage where the chapter ends with a character saying something following the bombing of Dresden, the firebombing of Dresden, which he witnessed. And then he says, and the person saying that was me. I was there. And I was like, it's just chilling. It just brings it all into focus. So I'm gonna give Mr. Vonnegut a pass as well. But largely, I mean, Invisible Hand is, you know, it's not the road to becoming a fan favorite in comics, because, but as I've said many, many times, and you can probably say it with me, my greatest compliment is when someone says, I was sorting all my comics the other day, and I was surprised at how many I had written by you. And that's the result of Invisible Hand writing. They weren't buying it because my name was on it. They were buying it because they liked the story. And they bought more because they liked the story. And maybe issue 6, 7, 8, they realized, hey, these are all by the same guy, or maybe they never did. I don't care. And for me, to my mind, Invisible Hand writing is one of the reasons I've had so much, I've had longevity in this business, a business that doesn't usually allow for longevity, particularly for writers. And I think it's because I wasn't always out there, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at what I'm doing, look how clever I am, look how smart I am. I just sort of, you know, hid my light under a bushel and let the story be the story. A good story plainly told is my watchword. Except when I'm writing Conan, then it gets purple. There's nothing plainly told about about a Conan story. Hey, have you subscribed? Well, maybe you have and you've been unsubscribed. I'm over the 10,000 mark. I think I got 10,108 subscribers, but I'd like to see that 10,500 just as a bumper, so I don't ever go below 10,000 again. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. You just got to hit that little button down below the video. And if you have subscribed, just take a look. Make sure you're still subscribed, because there's funny business going on there. Gentle Savage, Mr. Dixon, are there any obscure genres that you're a fan of? I don't know about obscure. I love a good submarine movie. and my wife loves a good submarine movie, and I think that's kept our marriage together. Because there just aren't enough submarine movies. I cannot tell you how many times we've watched, you know, Run Silent, Run Deep, Torpedo Run, Operation Pacific, Destination Tokyo. We watched them all of them. I won't let her watch U-571 though, because it's just so awful. You don't want to see it. And even Das Boot, both the movie and the TV series. So it's a genre I really like. Why not? Who doesn't like a submarine movie? I don't think there's ever been a submarine movie made that lost money. It's a genre that the audience responds to, and everything's there. You know, as I mentioned before, claustrophobia and drowning. I think most of us have fears of both of those things. Being crushed to death in a tin vessel, so that's pretty harrowing. And there's all these things that can go wrong, and the dynamics and the dramatics between the crew, and it's just, oh man, submarine movies are awesome. And you know, they need to make more of them. I always said if I was the head of a studio, I would make one submarine movie a day. I'm not Roger Corman. One submarine movie a year, release it at Christmas time, and I would never lose money. So another one is, I don't know if it's a subgenre, but it's the kind of movie I like. I've discussed it here before. The You Don't Know Who You're Messing With movie, where you introduce a character and he gets put upon and pissed upon and pushed around, and then he's not going to have it anymore, and that's when you find out he's like the biggest badass on the planet. You know, he's your worst nightmare. And First Blood, of course, falls into that. And one of my favorite of this genre is a movie called You're Next. And it's a typical slasher film but the bad guy runs up against someone who's just not going to take it anymore and has the skills to see that that's so. So you don't know who you're messing with. Story. I don't think it's a subgenre, but I like it. But if you're talking about like steampunk or something like that, no, there's no. I can't think of an obscure genre like that would surprise you that I like, because I watch just about everything. Bollywood, giallo, Japanese samurai movies, Hong Kong crime films. I mean, I watch just about everything, but they're not really obscure, are they? I mean, if you're watching this, you're an informed fan on some level, right, of stuff. Not a informed fan of me necessarily, but an informed fan of pop culture in general. I mean, you've got a higher pop culture IQ than most people, I would assume. Otherwise, why would you be watching something like this? Why would it interest you? And I gotta assume you folks know all the genres, and are fans of one or the other. Twin spin for the Gentle Savage. Also, were you ever a fan of any of the CW, superhero, Arrowverse shows? My youngest watched Green Arrow, or Arrow, whatever it was called, and he watched The Flash. And I watched a couple of seasons of Arrow with him. It's like, sit and watching it, together. This is what's on TV. You chose this, and we're going to watch it. And I mean, it was okay. I can't say I really followed it. A lot of it didn't make any sense to me. I mean, I understood what was going on, but their choices in story didn't make any sense to me. And I quickly realized that they would pad the shows out because the action is expensive to shoot, and they did quite a bit of action scenes in these things, and action scenes that weren't bad. I mean, the fight coordination, everything else, solid stuff. But that's expensive to shoot, so they would have scene after scene after scene of people in rooms talking about other people who weren't there, and you realize that's what the writers are told to do. It's like, look, we gotta pad this thing out, so have Diana and Steve talking about Doug, who's not there for a while, and that'll kill some time on the air, and then have them almost kiss and one of them fall out a window, and then we go cut the commercial. So, that kind of thing. And then I watched maybe the whole first season of Flash, which I kind of enjoyed that more than Arrow. I thought it was good. It was frequently homages to Silver Age Arrow stories. And the people doing that show seemed to really dig it and like it. And they came up with some really clever stuff. Again, constricted by budget to do the special effects necessary for the Flash. But I think they did a good job of fudging it for the most part. And again, like Arrow, people, you got a lot of what about Barry scenes, people talking about Barry when he wasn't around. And then, but you could see the budget constraints, which are understood on a TV show. The Gorilla Grodd episode particularly, which I think they did really good considering they just did not have the money to do Gorilla Grodd properly. I think they did a damn good job on it. But, I lost interest after a while because I think these shows sort of, wore out their welcome for me. And my son, kind of after a couple of seasons, lost interest as well. I think he continued watching Arrow to the end, but I'm not sure. But I didn't. So there you go. And I didn't watch even a minute of any of the other shows. I can't even remember what ones they were. So, Comic 616. My question concerns the French character Garat, one of the mercenaries hired by Rosalie Carbone in Punisher Warzone 8 through 10. 1992. As he operates in Marseille and specializes in strangling, I was wondering if he was a continuation of an earlier idea seen in Mark Spector Moon Knight number 13, 1990. In this story set in Marseille, there is a scene where Arsenal, also a mercenary, caught in a police van, begins to strangle an officer with his handcuffs in order to be freed. It's only a short sequence, but in the same city with the same type of method. Perhaps in retrospect, it was a prototype of something. I gotta say, you are a dedicated fan of my run on Mark Spector Moon Knight. I've answered so many questions about my 24-issue run here, and I don't mind answering. This is interesting. This is what this is for you to ask me questions, and I like it when we get granular, when we get right down into it. And why did you write this way, and why did you write that way? That's really what this show is for. Um, yeah, it's just, you know, for some reason, maybe from watching World War II movies when I was a kid, I always associate strangling someone with a wire with the French, because you see it in every, you know, World War II movie that involved the French resistance. They're always going around strangling German sentries. I once chided my oldest son for how much dental floss he would use. So what are you going to do? Strangle a German? Uh, just take out, you know, 6 feet of dental floss wrapped around his hands like he's going to go at it. But at this time, set in Marseille with the garroting and everything else, I got to think I was thinking of this scene from Marathon Man, this harrowing scene where Roy Scheider is almost strangled to death by a guy using a length of piano wire. And if you've never seen Marathon Man, you need to see it. This is one of the best scenes in it. It's a terrific action scene, and it's scary. It's very scary. And maybe that was what I was thinking of. But like I said, for some reason I always, and garrote is a French word, so maybe they invented it. So maybe that's why I'm associating it. So, but largely, you know, you don't know where these things come from. You know, you're writing something and you need an idea. You know, how am I going to kill this guy? Which is an frequent subject I'm always thinking about. How are we going to kill this guy? And I came up with garroting because it just wasn't often seen. So let's have story time. This is a brief story, and but I always found it amusing and remember it with some fondness. Back in the day, I was working for Larry Hama a lot, so I would sort of Conan, other stuff. So I would get invited. I got invited up for lunch with Larry, which was kind of a rarity. And I think this was the first time I met Gary Quapis. He invited me up so Gary and I could, you know, hang out a little bit because we were going to be working on Conan together. And he thought, you know, we would enjoy each other's company, that we would be on the same page, certainly about Conan and other things. And absolutely true. Gary became my long-time friend and my most frequent collaborator. We worked on stuff over and over and over again and enjoyed doing that. So Larry was right. We were meant to be partners creatively on a lot of stuff. And so anyway, as usual, you know, you show up to Marvel offices and his assistant Pat would sit you down on his sofa, and you had to wait till Larry was done with his business. And Larry was talking to me. Gary hadn't shown up yet. Larry was talking to me about something, and his phone rang. And he picks up the phone, and I got clear from his side of the conversation that someone had put Larry down as a reference on a job application. And I was stunned. I think the last person on earth I'd ever put down as a reference on a job application would be Larry Hama, because God knows what he would tell the people who were calling to check up on you, to see if you were a good worker or timely. Larry was a guy, one of those few people I've ever met in life where you had no idea what he was going to say next. I mean, zero. You could not anticipate this guy's take on any subject. And he was consistent over time. You know, he wasn't just willy-nilly throwing out crazy non sequitur ideas, but pinning down his life philosophy was near impossible. So he's on the phone and he's like aggravated. You know, he doesn't want to be doing this, giving references for somebody. And then apparently the person on the other end asked him to go on hold. And Larry said something I think we've all wanted to say. He said, "I don't go on hold." And he just hung up. Just slam that old phone down, back in the days when you could slam a phone down. And that's it. That's one of my Larry Hama stories. One of the ones I can tell you. There's plenty I can't tell you. But so anyway, if you want to hear more stories, you have more questions, you have suggestions, whatever, you contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com, because that's the most reliable way to reach me. That is it for this week, sadly. I'll try to be here next week. But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, subscribing, all the rest of it. And I will see all of you, I hope,